Good morning. My name is Andrew Massingham, and I am a geography teacher and EdTech practitioner at Cholney High School for Girls. Today, I'm going to be looking at Rosenshine's fourth principle and showing you how I have used the research and integrated it into my teaching practice. So the fourth principle is all to do with modelling. So what I'm going to be discussing today is how we as teachers can provide students with models and worked examples to ensure that we are able to help them learn and solve problems efficiently. I have broken the research down into four main areas. The first area I'm going to look at is the fact that worked examples allow students to focus on the specific steps to solve problems and thus reducing the cognitive load on their working memory. So it's all to do with chunking to ensure that the content is much more accessible, and this allows the child to digest and formulate the learning much more effectively. So the worked example that I have included on the next slide is actually a song. And the song tells a story about how the Nile brought life to the people. So what I've done is I've given that as a worked example, and then I've provided the students with a variety of steps in order to fully understand this problem and then apply it independently. So after the students have watched the video, I have provided a framework in order for us to break the content down into 6 simple steps. Now this enables students to access it much more easily. If you just played, a 3-minute song and then asked them to tell me about how the River Nile brought life to the people of the Nile, it would be very challenging because it's completely new content to them. So what I've done is I've broken it down into 6 and I've asked them to think about just one specific question. So the first question is, what did the people do to control the water and irrigate the land? They would again possibly go back to the song and find that piece of information and then write it down. So because this is for year 8s and 9s, I would not ask them to think of those questions yet themselves. I'm still at a stage where I would feel like it's necessary to provide them with the necessary prompts. But the key part for this exercise is ensuring there is steps for the learning, and we're chunking it to make it more accessible. Now, once they've done this, I would ask them to apply the learning independently into a storyboard to make it much more visual and memorable to ensure that it stays in the long-term memory. So to review, we would have provided a worked example, which would have been the song. We would have then provided a framework for the students to break down the content into specific steps. And each of those steps will look at addressing just one particular question. And by us doing this, we have reduced the cognitive load. And then finally, we have set up an exercise where students can creatively apply the learning. And what you will see on this slide is an example of that. The student has been asked to take that information she's found and turn it into a storyboard. And you'll see here again, it's been chunked where there are 6 specific steps to how the River Nile brought life to the people. The second area of Rosenshine's fourth principle, which I'm going to look at, is the fact that many of the skills that are taught in the classrooms can be conveyed by providing prompts, modelling use of the prompt, and then guiding students as they develop independence. And I'm going to be looking at 2 specific examples I have implemented into my lessons in the next few slides. So for this first example, just to provide some context, in the lesson we were looking at how colonialism in Rwanda has led to a lack of development in the country. and a large percentage of the people still live in extreme poverty. Now, what we were really looking at is the different strategies which Belgium put into place when they first colonised Rwanda to create that control. And it was very, very distressing information. It was very difficult for us to really understand the situation, really gain a perspective. So what I did was I tried to create a scenario which we could understand. I provided a worked example which the students could read through to gain some perspective of the situation. So I created an overall objective of the fact that they come to a geography lesson because they want to learn and gain a good set of GCSE results. But what I tried to do was show how if certain factors were in play, it would be very difficult for them to get those GCSE results. Just like in Rwanda, there were certain factors in play which made it very difficult for the country to develop. So I have created a scenario where I said, well, you have been given a new teacher who has their own objective. So once we'd gone through this, it understood that the new teacher actually represented the Belgian colonists. He has allegiances to the other Year 10 classes and therefore wants to use his power to ensure the other Year 10 classes exceed. Again, just like with the Belgian colonists, they would take the resources from Rwanda and use it for their own gain. SC1 will no longer have interactive whiteboards and will be swapped with a chalkboard. You will not have exercise books to write down notes. You will not have desks to work on. On top of this, the new teacher has created division in the classroom. All students taller than 5'5" no longer need to do any homework and have the power to force students under this height to do their homework for them. This creates clear hatred amongst the two groups of people. Again, this is what happened when Belgium colonised Rwanda. Once your class has been drained of its resources, the new teacher returns to his other Year 10 classes. Before he left, he put those under 5'5" in charge because there was more of these students in the class. These students have been treated very poorly over many years and want revenge on the taller students. Over time, conflict and student war broke out. The infrastructure of the class is completely destroyed, and in all the chaos, many people wanted to flee. Those who did remain were unable to get the basic need of education and failed their GCSE. The overall objective was not achieved. So again, it was just a way of providing a worked example, which we could then discuss as a class and show the connection to the Rwanda case study. So the second example for providing prompts and providing worked examples of those prompts is shown on this slide. And in this particular lesson, we were looking at the positive multiplier effect. This is really important for developing that holistic explanation. Now, before it actually looked at a positive multiplier effect in the context of the geography lesson we were looking at, I first of all provided one where the students have the knowledge already. So as you can see on this slide, I created a positive multiplier effect for Miss Dolan delivering a motivational speech for the upcoming Pink Day. Now this provides a visual prompt for students to show how the positive multiplier effect works. And once they'd been able to fully understand that, I asked them to then apply it to a scenario of their own. So they can really develop that skill of being able to provide, to understand and produce that positive multiplier effect. So the third part to Rosenshine's fourth principle is when teaching students to write an essay, an effective teacher will first of all model how a paragraph is expected to be written. And the students and the teachers work together on first producing one or two of those paragraphs before students are then given the independence to continue with one themselves, but with that supervision of the teacher. Now, for this part of the principle, I've broken it down into 4 steps. And the first step is where we are reflecting on that past learning through analysing and annotating a particular picture which represents that learning. It's all about refreshing the memory and showing how you can use the knowledge to formulate an exam question. So in the picture here, you can see a picture of Rio, and I have analysed and annotated this picture to show how we could create a peel paragraph from the content. The second part is actually breaking down the question itself. And this is something which students in particular will struggle with. The wording of the question may confuse them, and they may be actually answering the question incorrectly. So by just underlining all those key words and actually stating next to those keywords what is expected, it allows the student to gain a much better understanding for what is expected of them. So the second part is all about breaking that question down. Now, the third part is all about practicing this particular style of question. Now, in geography, assessing the extent is a very key area for students to know. It's a 9 marker where there's a lot of marks available, and it's actually not too difficult if you're able to understand how to write those style questions. So for this example, it's just about formulating that structure. It's not about anything to do with geography, it's just knowing how to structure assessing the extent questions. Now, the final step is all about creating a plan of action for when we actually want to write the question. And what we've done here is, as a class, we've created a table which shows us the structure, and we have discussed as a class which points will be relevant for each box. We would then model one paragraph together, and then students will have the necessary understanding to carry out the exam question themselves. The final part of Rosenshine's fourth principle is all to do with inquiry-led learning. So the research states that in one class, students were given words such as who, where, why, and how to help them begin a question. Then everyone reads a passage, and the teacher can model how to use these words to ask questions. So the example which I'm going to look at, which I've used in lessons, is where I will show a picture, and the picture will provide some insight into the area we're going to be looking at. And I provide question stems of the who's, the where's, the why's, and the how's. And I encourage students to be inquisitive, inquiry-led thinkers, and imagine they are sitting in front of someone who has knowledge of this area, and I ask them to think of what sort of intellectual questions they could ask to help them gain better perspective. So this is a very, very simple tool to use for that inquiry-led learning. We have a picture which represents an area of learning. You provide some prompts, some worked examples of questions that students could ask, and then you just provide those question stems of the who's, the what's, the when's, the why's, the how's, and the where's, just to encourage students to be those curious learners who want to ask questions about the learning that is taking place. And finally, it's about reflecting on those questions as a class and seeing if we can think of some answers or areas where we can go and look for those answers. It provides that holistic outlook which students can take forward and gain a much better understanding of the topic. So that's Rosenshine's fourth principle, and that's how I've integrated it into my lessons. Thank you.